So now to tell you about my new book, I hope people would have seen the cover. I'm just showing it. I hope it's visible. Uh, so this new book builds on what I wrote in my first book. The titles of the two books are somewhat similar, so sometimes people get confused. The first one was called The Educational Heritage of Ancient India, and the second one is Revisiting the Educational Heritage of India. So that educational heritage is a common phrase, so sometimes people get confused and they buy the first book thinking that that's the latest one. Um, so the word revisiting is the clue. It tells you that I'm revisiting the topic. And so my second book actually builds on whatever was in the first book and gives a lot more details, and it has many more aspects about the education system of ancient India, from which there is a lot that we can learn. Basically, my book gives you a snapshot of the Gurukula system of education, and it tells you about the learning, teaching, debating, memorizing traditions that existed in India, and how there was an enormous value attached to education. So it is that is what actually makes our civilization stand out. That education was given more value than anything else. So that you'll find it again and again as a theme coming in various scriptures, various books. That you might be accomplished, you might be good looking, you might be from a good lineage, but if you don't have education, then you are like a flower, a colorful flower, but with no fragrance. So it was all education was given this much of value, and that makes our civilization stand out. And the important thing is that we had so many ceremonies that mark the milestones of education. So for example, we had Vidyarambha, which was the first time a child learns how to, a child becomes acquainted with the alphabet, you could say, and traces the letter called either Om or Ka or A. So this was a ceremony. And the fact that we have such a ceremony, which is coming down from so many years, hundreds of years, thousands of years, shows to you that we gave so much importance to education, literacy, knowledge. So this is there are many ceremonies, not just Vidyarambha. Of course, Bengalis would be familiar with Hate Khodi, which is similar to Vidyarambha in the which is very
And
common. It's sorry.
Saraswati Puja, during the Saraswati Puja.
During Saraswati Puja, they do Hate Khodi. And then in the south, typically it's Vidyarambha, which is also done during important auspicious times. That's the time they do it. So that whole ceremony where people are invited to watch this when a child is learning the alphabet, that shows that there is so much importance given to it. Then there is the Upanayana ceremony, which marked the entry into higher education. And it was performed uh, only mostly by those who understood the significance of it. It was supposed to be performed by everybody, whoever went into higher learning, but those who only understood the significance did it. Um, and today, of course, it has become largely symbolic. It was an elaborate ceremony back in those in the time, and it signified that the child is now entering the brahmacharya phase and is no longer going to be pampered and no longer going to be doing whatever he or she likes. There's now going to be rigor and discipline. So the Upanayana ceremony was like a second birth for a child, because now the child is going to be different. It's going to be a reinvented child now, who's a student who is now on the path of learning and seeking. So that's what that ceremony was about, and that's why those who performed the ceremony were called dvijas. Okay, so on the completion of the whole course, so Upanayana was when the child entered into higher education, and then the child would move in with the guru in the Gurukula and spend a certain number of years studying under the guru, which could be 8 years, 12 years, depending on what the child was interested in and what the guru saw in that student. And then on the completion of the whole course, after the final examination, Then there would be a ceremony called Samavartana, which is similar to today's graduation or convocation. But the Samavartana was more meaningful. It had so many beautiful shlokas which would be chanted, which would create a sense of importance, a sense of solemnity that this is a very important occasion, and yeah, we have come here for a purpose. This life is for a purpose. So all that would be brought out during the Samavartana. And so this shows that we had all these ceremonies which show that we had a knowledge centric society, and men and women of learning were respected wherever they went. So, by the way, women also were getting Upanayana done in the earlier days in the Vedic period. And then, of course, later on it was done away with for a variety of reasons. So I want to point out that we had a spectrum of educational institutions, a variety of them: Gurukula, Vihara, Matha, Agrahara, Ghatika, Pathshala. So many of them. As you go explore the history of the land, you'll find that there were a variety of educational institutions. Tolls in Bengal, there were tolls, and these institutions were multidimensional. Okay, so for example, the Matha was not just a place where the students went to have their classes, where they learned and they stayed. It was also a place where travelers could come and rest. So if a new person came to town, then the person would look for a Matha where he or she could stay. So Matha was also a place which gave shelter to travelers. And so the classes are going on, and the travelers are also having the rooms to stay in. So imagine that kind of a time. Actually, even today you will find mathas like that, because when I went to Kumbh Mela and I stayed in a matha, then I got that I understood what it was like in ancient times. The travelers were staying in the rooms, classes were going on in the temple, uh, and then they could interact also. The travelers were also interacting with the students. Also, in addition to all this, there were mathas that treated treated people who were sick. So there would be Vaidyas stationed in the mathas. So if any traveler was feeling unwell, then the Vaidya would prescribe the medication, and the proper diet also would be given. So this facility also was there. And then if the travelers were with animals, any animals like there's a cow or buffalo, or they're traveling with their dogs, whatever, those animals also would get medical treatment if needed. So there were Vaidyas for that as well in the Matha. So these are some little things that we don't know, which made our civilization so special. And then not only did we have the full-time courses, the ones which went on for 8 years or 12 years, we even had short courses. We had summer schools, summer courses for those who wanted to do a quick course and get some knowledge. So there were the Vasantika students who joined the courses during the spring, the Vasant. And there were short courses in other seasons like in Varsha, Sharad, Hemanta, Shishira. So you had students who were called by the name. They had the name of the course itself, like Varshika, the Varshika students, the Sharadika students, the Hemantika students, the Shaishirika students. So they were doing that course in that season. Okay, so it is not a new invention. Summer courses and all, they are not new inventions in our country. They've been there for ages.
Many
Uh,
significance of those seasons actually. Why in summer and why during the
uh,
Varsha?
I am not very sure of that. I mean, I have this information that they had the short courses, but maybe I have to delve deeper and find out whether there was something
Okay.
special taught in those different seasons. Um, so the teacher was the most respected person in the society. That is something very, very special to our civilization, very unique, because the amount of importance we give to the teacher is uh, that the teacher is next to God, like next to Govinda himself. So the whole society was designed to support the scholars, the teachers, as well as the students. So the society would automatically give respect to a scholar and see if they needed anything and try to fill that need. So there was great merit associated with giving to teachers and to educational institutions. So this was also built into our religious ceremonies themselves. So they would, whenever there is a religious ceremony, it would include the giving of something, food or clothes or something to scholars. Now, scholars could even actually just stand outside the door of, so that was the culture. For food, they could stand outside any door, and the lady of the house would come out and feed the scholar. That was the culture. So, and of course, it doesn't mean, I mean, typically the culture was everybody has to give to a scholar. But during it was called bhiksha. Bhiksha is wrongly translated into, giving of alms or begging, but Bhiksha was actually a very respectable way. It actually was introduced to bring about humility in the students. That's why when they became brahmacharis, they had to live by Bhiksha, so that whatever they were able to get during the day, that's the only thing they can eat. Once or twice in a day, they have to go and get the Bhiksha. And if they don't get anything, any food that day, then they won't eat that day. They have to fast. So this is how, they would, to bring about humility. Even if there is a prince, someone from the royal family, when that person is studying in a Gurukula and goes for Bhiksha, then it brings about humility. Like, you're now, the society has to take care of you, right? So you will value society and you will yourself change from within. So that is why Bhiksha was there. And but typically the whole society valued that a scholar is making so many sacrifices to study very difficult subjects, and doing a lot of sadhana. So they would typically even give up their own food in order to feed the scholar. That was the culture. And I must mention that debate was a very important tool of learning. So as the students were studying, debate was part of the curriculum. So the teacher would sometimes test the knowledge of the students by making them debate, and then only the teacher would know whether they have understood it, because when they went to debate, they also had to know the opponent's point of view. So that way they should know how to take the opposite view as well and argue from that point of view. So that's why they are aware of all the perspectives. So debate was very important. Shastrarth, and you will find a mention of this in many texts. Ramayana, Mahabharata, Skanda Purana, Yagnavalkya Samhita, Chandogya Upanishad. You will find constant mention of debate as a way of learning, teaching. And also, the kings were very fond of organizing debate tournaments, intellectual tournaments. So these would be looked forward to by those who want to know more about a subject. And so those who had superior knowledge, uh, better communication, public speaking skills, they used to win the debate. I mean, those who also followed the rules of behavior. And this is how the common people would hear different viewpoints of scholars and form their own opinions. And they would also get their role models, because in many kingdoms, whoever won these tournaments, debate tournaments, would be taken around the city in a chariot, and the people would get to see these people and know that these are our role models. These are our gyanis that we need to learn from. So that's the way they were also taken out in a chariot. Uh, so basically, the spirit of rationality, rational thinking was very well developed. So physical phenomena were observed closely, and the rules of logic were applied to decode them. So that's why we have so many scientific texts where the phenomena are described, they are analyzed, some certain rules are derived from them. So this is how it was. And there were in Nyaya Shastra there are different kinds of evidence, right? There is the physical evidence, which is the pratyaksha pramana, which is visible. Then there is the inference, which is the anumana, or the verbal testimony. That was also very different kinds of evidence that shows that we were so logical, that we were looking at the evidence and thinking about what kind of evidence is it and how much value should be given to it, and then we were analyzing, and then that's how all this whole corpus of literature has been created. In Ayurveda, for especially, you'll be astounded by the manner in which the deductions have been made about various diseases, how the disease is actually coming from an absence of balance how the balance of the body has been disturbed by this, by improper food or other conditions, and so this has caused an imbalance. How to bring back the balance? It was not, so they were not looking at disease as, like some medicine which has some condition of one part of the body which has to be treated. It was always holistic. It was very logical. So you'll find it in any shastra that you take up. You'll find that logic is there in it. And in this ecosystem of learning, a lot of valuable knowledge was created, which was for the whole world. It was not just for our land. It was meant for everybody. That was the understanding. You will find a lot of details in my book. So today, when we study mathematics or programming or engineering or language, we do not appreciate that we owe so much to the Indian scholars of ancient times. So this, all that knowledge has evolved and come to this that we are studying today, right? We don't appreciate that. So there are all these gurus, Kanada, Panini, Patanjali, Pingala, Bharata Muni, so many, Varaha Mihira, all these gurus. We need to remember the debt that we owe to them for thinking so much about various aspects of the universe, and putting it all down in the form of no, literature, of scriptures or books that we which were initially in the oral form, which were passed down orally, and then when writing came, they were written down, and that's how we could build upon it, and that's why we have reached where we have reached today. So we owe it all to the gurus. And uh, I do not think I'm exaggerating when I say that the edifice of modern knowledge that we have today stands on the foundation laid by these gurus, the Guru Shishya Parampara of India. We owe a lot to them. And in my book, I actually have a map which shows all the advanced educational institutions in India, which existed at different points of time. And in the latest book, I have about more than 80 centers of education spread out all over India. And that will give you an idea of how much knowledge was created. Imagine those times when it was so difficult to travel, when the India had so many forests, there were wild animals, and it wasn't easy to travel. Even in those times, there were all these educational institutions, and they were set up by scholars, sometimes from one institution who has traveled to the other one, to another part of the country to set up a similar institution, right? So that's how they were all set up, and the students also were traveling to whichever institute that had the specialization that they wanted. So it's not just a recent phenomenon that, okay, we choose that we want to study medical in AIMS and we want to do engineering somewhere else. It was there from thousands of years in India. Uh, Now, I want to emphasize that higher education was not for everyone. It was not that everybody is doing the Upanayana and getting into higher knowledge. That was not how it was. Most people learned skills or vocations. So, whether it's carpentry or sculpting or dancing or music, or textile manufacturing, or there were thousands of jatis, right? And all of these were actually associated with industries, some kind of occupation, home based industries or professions, and the whole family used to be involved in these in the activities. So the elders would teach the youngsters. The women also were part of this. So it's not like only men are doing the work, or men or only the women are doing the work. Everybody was involved, whether textile manufacturing, dyeing, designing, all these things. And so by the age of 10 or 11, the children were able to manage shops, or they would be helping with the business. They already knew how to uh, generate revenue for the family. By the age of 10 or 11, just imagine, uh, today, even by the age of 22, graduates sometimes don't have any skills. They don't have the ability to earn a livelihood. But in those times, they were already mature very early, because right from day one, they are watching what the elders are doing, how they are working, and they would also join in that. So there were only a very small number of people who wanted to not who wanted to not just learn skills, but also they wanted to study Sanskrit grammar. They want to study the Adhyatmic texts. They want to study all the commentaries that have been written down the ages and think about them, reflect about them. So those were the children that went into higher education. Those who became brahmacharis were those kind of students who wanted the Vedic knowledge, wanted to spend years and years studying it. Okay. So let's remember that today, at the age of 8 or 10, children are still in primary schools, but in those days they're already ready for higher education. Those who wanted to go for either higher education or for skills, they were already ready for the world. And character building was very important in ancient times, and especially for higher education. So higher education was higher in the true sense, because it meant a connection with one's inner self, and uh, becoming self-aware, right? So higher education was high in that sense, that you're of high moral character, and you spent years and years developing all your morals, your sense of dharma. So that is what higher education was, and not everybody wanted to go into that. So it was also with the aim of helping society, of doing good to the larger community, and of performing dharma. Those were the ones who were going to higher education. Today, higher education means engineering, medicine, but there's no connection with self-realization. So in that sense, it is not higher education at all. If you go by the standards of our rishis, then today's higher education is not higher. So
That's
in
why
my yes,
brahmacharya was important at that time.
yes, very important, and that's why in my new book I have a whole chapter on brahmacharya. I didn't have it in my first book. I realized that it's something that needs to be told. So the values such as discipline, self-control, the whole attitude of learning and seeking, right? That I'm here to seek and learn, even from people whom I don't agree with. I'm there to learn from them. That whole attitude. Then shraddha, dedication, celibacy, compassion, respectfulness. So all these things were inculcated during the brahmacharya years. So, and these were a part of the credentials that a graduate needed to have. So graduate is today's graduates or today's job seekers just need to talk about the degrees that they hold, but there is that character certificate that comes from going through the brahmacharya period, that is missing. And so in today's education system, I think we have sorely neglected brahmacharya. And if we look at the social problems that the world is facing today, I think it can be linked to the absence of brahmacharya. So we hear about, children going into depression, they're taking drugs to get into a high. They are getting jealous. Somebody else is having more, maybe higher grades, or is better looking, is having more, or having a boyfriend or a girlfriend. All these things should be taken care of during the brahmacharya period, because those things are natural feelings that come, but under the guidance of a guru, a student would learn how to overcome all this, how to see the big perspective, and that part is missing in our education today. So if you ask me about the main difference between education in modern times and ancient times, I would say that we are a pale shadow of what we were in ancient times. So our education system is neither preparing the students with real skills, like skills that we need today. We need good communication, the ability to write good documents, programming skills. It is not preparing them for that, nor is it giving them atmagyana. So we find that many of the graduates, they're not able to communicate well. Ask them to write something, and you'll see that the document is not well written. It doesn't flow logically, jumping from one thing to the other. They don't know how to write. So it's neither preparing them for the skills that you need in the job market, nor is it teaching them to go, for self-realization, self-awareness. So I see that problem. So one question that I'm often asked is whether women were being educated in ancient times. So that for that I have a chapter on women's education in my book. Of course, women were getting educated because the deity of knowledge was herself feminine, the divine feminine, Saraswati. And so it was the responsibility of parents to ensure that all their children got a basic education: reading, writing, arithmetic, various other things. That was part of the basic education. Everybody had to get it. And again, as I mentioned to you, higher education was not for everyone. Only those who were deeply interested in it, who were ready to sacrifice, have a life, lead a life of sacrifice, because so many years would be devoted to it, so much time would go into it. Only those people were going into higher education, and we do hear of women also going for that. And the Upanayana was being performed for women also in Vedic times. And then we find the mention of highly educated women who were learned in the Shastras, like the Brahmavadinis. And we also hear of women who were expert in the 64 kalas, right? The skills, writing poetry, making things. And many of those kalas have a lot, are actually have a lot of technology in them. Knowing the technology, knowing science, all this was included in the kalas. Okay. Um, and in the Mahabharata, there's a mention of ashramas that were run by women gurus exclusively. And then in Buddha's time, we hear of women bhikshunis who join the monasteries, and they are also going out into the world and preaching. They're getting followers. So we see all that. Then we hear of learned women who are taking part in debates. They're asking questions, arguing, and they're moderating debates. For example, we have the famous debate between Shankaracharya and Mandana Mishra, which was moderated by a woman. And imagine how learned she has to be, Ubhaya Bharti, if she has to listen to both sides of the debate and decide who is the winner. So clearly, women were highly educated. Uh, and in Buddha's time, we hear of names like Sumedha, Anupama, Shubha, right? Then we have the famous book on mathematics called Leelavati, written by Bhaskaracharya. And it is, the whole book is full of problems, right? Mathematics, geometry, and various other topics of mathematics. It has a lot of problems. And the book is addressed to a woman. It's asking the woman to solve it. So you can see from the language that it is written for a woman. So why would there be a math book for women if they were not being educated? Uh, then you have many examples. Like there are Sanskrit plays written by Bhavabhuti in the 8th century. So there is a play called Malti Madhava, and in that you have a female student named Kamandaki, and she is shown to be a classmate of two male students called Bhuri Vasu and Devarata, and she is shown to be with these two male classmates. Right? It's in a play in the 8th century. Then we have another play in which there's a woman student who is saying that her name is Atreyi, and she's telling her friend Vasanti that my guru is not paying attention to me and he's too busy with his own writing. So I want to look for another guru, and so I'm going to travel to the southern part of the land to find a good guru for herself, right? So there are examples indicating that women were being highly educated. Then there are many terms that were used for women scholars specializing in a certain subject. And many of these subjects were very difficult subjects, they were not easy, right? And there are terms for the women who are studying that subject, which shows that that term would not be there in a dictionary, in a Sanskrit dictionary, if there were not enough number of women students who were studying that subject. And in my research, I came across a carving which was found in Karnataka, in the Kolar district, of a woman called Savinir Madi, I think. And she is shown to be holding a manuscript in her hand. She's shown like an ascetic with her hair all tied up. And her name is mentioned, that she's the daughter of so and so. And she's not from any royal family. She seems to be from a simple family. She's just a daughter of so and so. And the villagers have made this carving of hers because they want to honor her. They want to respect her for her knowledge. It's written that she is expert in shastras and all that. So you see, we have all these evidences from all over the land, which show that women were being highly educated. And also, women were actually wearing, in terms of clothing, also, if you see, they were wearing the same clothes as the men. There was no compulsion on them to cover their bodies, but with the invasions and colonization, a lot of things changed. So it was slowly the position of women got degraded, and they had to become as invisible as possible, because we know that whenever there's a war, right, especially when we had the Islamic invasions, the women were the easy targets. The whole slave trade started, which wasn't there before in our country. The trade of slaves, women slaves, male slaves. There were markets where the women are being sold and bought. So to protect the women from all this, we became more conservative, and so the women were not going out to study like before. They were being homeschooled, and also in their dressing, they had to become very conservative. So you'll find these details in my book. Uh, there's a new topic that I've taken up in my book, and that's the importance of memory training. There's a whole chapter on it, which I wasn't there in my first book, but which I researched on. And I found that memory training was a very important aspect of learning, right? So if you did not have a good memory, then there was no way you would have got admission into Nalanda, Vikramshila, any of the well-known gurukulas or universities, because memory was so important. Today, we tend to be very dismissive about memory because now we have books, we have writing, we have notebooks, and then we have the hard disks, we have clouds. So we have outsourced everything, and we have Google. But there's actually a superior learning curve when your memory skills have been developed. So memory helps you to join the dots. So you have all this information. If it's there in your brain, you're able to connect it quickly and derive conclusions, right? Rather than each time you have to keep searching for it, and you may not even know what you have to search for. Well, so compare that with a system where people remembered so much. They could remember entire granthas in their mind, right? Several granthas, and they could recall it at will, and it also helped them in their speaking and communication, and it also helped them in their analysis. So there was this famous study which was carried out by James Hartzell. I have mentioned that in my book, and he found that the Brahmanas, the oral tradition that was of learning the Vedas that was being followed by the Brahmanas, how it was helping in improving cognition. He has found that. He has written a thesis on that. So the oral tradition of the Vedas was that the mantras were chanted in 11 different ways. So they knew that the mind doesn't remember in a linear fashion. So you have to find non-linear ways of remembering. So the 11 ways had different names. Samhita Patha, Pada Patha, Krama Patha, and others. And then ultimately it concludes with the Ghana Patha, and that would help the students to develop formidable memories. And this has been mentioned even by the Chinese scholars who came to study in India, that they were astonished that the Indians have such good memories. And in fact, the British observed that it's not just the Vedic scholars. They found that even the ordinary people had good memories. The washer, the dhobi, the person who sold medicines in the shop, he's the Ayurvedic, the dispenser of medicines. He knows, he pulls out some bottle from somewhere which is the exact medicine that you need. And the observers were fascinated by the memories of these ordinary people in India, that they remember all this, every bottle, they know what it contains, even without labeling. That was the kind of memory they had. So I have mentioned memory as a very important aspect of education. And then the other thing that I have a whole chapter on is storytelling. Through stories, how so much was taught. It was very important aspect of education. So India was a civilization that understood the power of storytelling. So whether we look at Upanishad or Ramayana, Mahabharata, Puranas, you can see that so much is conveyed by stories. Everything is told in the form of stories. There was a person who lived in this village, and this happened, that happened, and finally, through the story, the whole message is conveyed. And it sometimes even mathematical concepts could be conveyed through stories. And of course, we had songs, dance, drama, puppet shows. All these were part of the storytelling tradition. And so the Panchatantra, the Hitopadesha, the Jataka tales, they traveled from India. Our culture of storytelling traveled from India to the rest of the world. So that's how Aesop's fables came about. Those fables, so they traveled to Greece. Our traditions, our educational methods traveled to Greece, to Persia. It traveled to the Muslim world, and then it went to the European world. All these things were shared. So Aesop was actually a slave in ancient Greece. And you can see that the talking animals and all that are there in those stories, they're not even found, those animals are not even found there. They're all from India. So Panchatantra was actually teaching the Niti Shastra in a very simplified way. And then the later, when the students who had learnt all these stories in their childhood, when they went to the important, the famous educational institutions like the Vallabi and various other institutions to study subjects like Niti Shastra, they already knew the concepts in the form of stories. So now they're going, so see, look at how there's a gradation of knowledge sharing. So first they're taught in the form of stories, then they go to higher institutes where the same things are taught in a theory form, right? So they are already able to connect to it because they know it in the form of stories. You'll find the details in my book. So we had stories, we had memory training, games. Games were also used informally for educations. They were, of course, we had the the outdoor sports. We had kushti, we had wrestling, all that was part of the culture. In fact, even temples used to have akhadas attached to them where, the people would build their bodies, right? So it was part of your taking care of your deha. Your body is also a temple. That was well understood. So you have to be physically fit. And there were various ways of teaching. You would invoke the blessings of Hanuman before you learned all this. But apart from that, we also had the indoor games, which were teaching many things to the students. So, for example, there were games like Moksha Patha and Jnana Chaupar, what we know today as
Ludo.
snakes and ladders, Samp Sidi,
Snakes and
snakes and ladders. It was actually a game that was teaching values to the children. It was not just, like today we have the watered down version, which was actually changed by the British, where we just have a number and, the pieces are moving on the number. If you come across a ladder, you go up. If you come across a snake, you come down to a lower number. So today is just a game of numbers, which just is a time pass. But in ancient times, if you every square had a virtue or a vice. So if you landed on a square with a virtue, like jnana, daya, various other patience, dhairya, then you would find a ladder which is taking you up to a higher number. And if you happen to land on a square with a vice like krodha, kama, various other vices, then you would go into the mouth of a snake and come down to a lower number. So, and then of course, the last square, the winner's square would be moksha. So you see that in the form of just playing, in form of games, the children are already taught that you are on the path of moksha, and that is your ultimate goal. It's not just becoming rich or influential, it's about moksha. So you are on in the process, you will find, you have all these virtues and vices, and you might fall or you might rise. So that's the way, ahankara, if you fall, if you get into a square with ahankara, you would fall. All these things were being taught to children at a very young age. And of course, the famous games like chess, uh, playing cards, they also originated in India. And so for princes and princesses, they had to learn chess as a part of their education, because that is what was teaching them strategy, diplomacy, strategy. All these things were being taught. And of course, initially, chess was not just a game of moving pieces turn by turn. It was also about dice combined with moving of the pieces in chess. So it was a combination of luck and using of intelligence and strategic knowledge. So only after the coming of the British, the moral aspects of all these games and the knowledge part of these games was taken away, and it became just a game of numbers. So I have a chapter on games. Then there is a big section. The longest chapter in my book deals with the transfer of knowledge from India, how Indian knowledge went to different parts of the world. So I've described how Indian knowledge went to China, how it went to Greece and Egypt, it went to Persia, Western Asia, Southeast Asia, Japan. All that has been given considerable attention. The routes and pathways by which the knowledge went. So we can say that our knowledge literally caused a knowledge revolution in the world. It is so the manner in which Indian knowledge went to Greece, for example, is very interesting. Uh, Today, people think in the West, people think that knowledge of science and medicine came from the Greeks. But if you look at it, if you examine history, you will find that even among the Greeks, it was fairly well known that Pythagoras, one of the influential Greek thinkers, Pythagoras, got his knowledge from Indians. This is said by the Greeks themselves. So he learned, he came into contact with people who taught him yoga, who taught him the various shastras, and that's how he evolved a system of Gurukula himself. Pythagoras is mentioned as going to the forest. He's surrounded by students, an inner circle of students who will get the most important knowledge, the secret knowledge, and then there is an outer circle which gets the more generic knowledge. So this is there, and then people say that Pythagoras went crazy when he came into contact with Indians because he became a vegetarian and he started believing in afterlife. He started believing that even the animals have an Atma. So these are the ideas that Greeks got from Indians, and then it was developed further. And all these Plato and all these people came afterwards, right? Aristotle, Archimedes, all these people came afterwards. So you can see the impact of Indian education on the
Ma'am,
Greeks.
also Arab numerals, our Indian numerals were known as Arab numerals to the Western world
Yes,
also.
correct. So first were the Greeks because they were before the Arabs. It was the Greeks who got that knowledge, and after the Arabs came later. So when you look at the Arabic works, you will find that they have been deeply influenced by Brahmagupta, Bhaskaracharya, Aryabhatta, Sushruta, and they're acknowledging them. They're actually mentioning all of them, and they were Indian scholars were received with great appreciation. They were honored. And that's how the Hindu numerals that we talked about, they got it from Brahmagupta in the 7th century. So the Al-Fazari translated his work. And there are many, many Arab scholars who translated the Indian works. And the subject of mathematics itself was called Hindisa, Al-Hindisa, which means it has come from Hindustan, India, where the Hindus live. That was the way they themselves put it. And later, when it went to Europe, they started calling it Arabic numerals, and that's how the connection with India was erased. Okay, uh, so it's amusing that the Chinese scholars who came to study in India, not only were they studying, not only were they getting the knowledge, but they were competing in a way to take the maximum number of manuscripts with them back to China. So they would be copying those manuscripts, or they would be getting official copiers to copy them for authentically for them, and then they would take all these manuscripts back with them to China. And the work of translating all these works into Chinese was a mammoth exercise, right? Because the language is very different. The syntax of the Chinese language is different. They didn't have words to translate into. They didn't have the equivalent words. So new words had to be created. So this is something that needs to be written about. The whole translation revolution which happened, through which Indian knowledge was transferred to China, to Greece, and to various other uh, Greek and various other languages. And we know some few names like Zhuanzang, Yijing, Fahian who came to India. What most of us don't know are the hundreds of scholars who went from India to China, Sanskrit scholars from India, who were being invited by the Chinese kings to come and live in China. They were being given comfortable lives, they were given good places to stay in, but they had to stay there and translate. The Chinese kings were not letting them leave until they were uh, translating those works into the Chinese language. So in a way, you have to also appreciate the Chinese, that they valued our knowledge and they went about it so systematically to build their own knowledge. So many of our Indian scholars were heads of institutions there. They got Chinese names once they went to China, and they were heading the board of astronomy, the board of mathematics. They were helping to set up the universities in China. Anyway, so
Ma'am,
just give me
are
some
those
time.
translated manuscripts still available? Those
Yes, if you go to China, you'll find that in many of the institutions have actually preserved our manuscripts. Of course, the translated ones are preserved there, and I think we Indians need to learn Chinese for this reason, so that we can study from there. We can get back, because we have lost so much knowledge. So we should think of how we can get it back from there. So China, Taiwan, all these countries. Taiwan has a huge repository of Sanskrit works. Japan as well. Japan also has. So via the Arabs, Indian knowledge finally reached the Christian world around the 11th century. So in many ways, the knowledge revolution that started from India, we can call it a translation revolution. So when the Christians traveled, the Christians conquered the Muslim nations, right? Muslim regions. So then they started accessing the Arabic works, right? So when the Muslim cities like Toledo in Spain were conquered, then the Christians came across a huge cache of manuscripts that the Muslims had, and then they wanted to know what is in them, and that's how they were the school of translation was set up in Toledo to translate all these Arabic works into Latin, and that's how the Indian works were now translated into Latin. Okay. Uh, so, in the 12th and 13th century, the Toledo School of Translators began to rapidly translate the Arabic books of science and math, which were the translation of Indian books. And the translators used to get good money. They were rewarded very well for their hard work of translating. They were paid in gold based on the number of books they were able to translate. And that is how we had the European Renaissance. Not many people know that the European Renaissance didn't happen just by chance. Suddenly there are so many scholars who came out with all this knowledge, right, during the European Renaissance. How did that happen? It's because they translated all these Arabic books at that time, and this knowledge became available to them, and it was projected as knowledge, European knowledge. Okay, so it is all there's actually a great deal of plagiarism and appropriation from the Indian sources, which lies behind the great Renaissance and the age of enlightenment that took place in Europe. We need to do more work in this area, more research to uncover all these connections. So that's a very important chapter in my book. And then the next part of my book deals with the destruction of the beautiful knowledge ecosystem that we had built in India over thousands of years. Because the question comes up, right? That it was so great, we had all this knowledge. Where did it all go? How did it get destroyed? That's a very important thing that we need to know. And so we come to know about it very clearly from the 11th century onwards by the historians themselves, the people who chronicle the times. For example, Al-Biruni, the 11th century historian who recorded how Mahmud Ghaznavi's invasions had caused the Hindus to scatter like atoms of dust, and how Hindu sciences have receded to areas where our hands have not yet reached them, like Kashmir, Varanasi, and South India. So Al-Biruni has mentioned this, that the Hindu sciences have gone far away where we cannot reach them. And he has mentioned that they have gone to Kashmir, they have gone to Varanasi, because in those days these were still distant for them, uh, uh, Varanasi and Kashmir. And of course, in the coming centuries, even these areas came under Islamic occupation, the Kashmir, right, Varanasi. So the destruction saga continued. It's the famous universities like Nalanda, Vikramshila, Udantapura, Somapura, Vallabi. I mean, there are hundreds of them, one after the other. The scholars were killed in these institutions. The books were burned. It was one of the most brutal destruction of knowledge that the world has ever witnessed. So there was a stamping out of Hindu learning and destruction of manuscripts everywhere. So even in South India, of course, it came much later, the occupation, and it was there for a shorter period. That's why today in the South you find more knowledge that has been preserved, and you find more destruction in northern India, where even the temples are not standing, right? Because temples were also centers of learning. Temples were where lots of manuscripts were preserved. So when a temple is destroyed, then you destroy knowledge along with it. That was seen very clearly in northern India. So, for example, in Kashmir, there is the Sikandar Shah, the infamous Sikandar Shah Miri, who's also called destroyer of idols. So he not only exterminated the Hindus, but he also destroyed their works, burnt them, threw them in the rivers. And you will find that in Tibet, a lot of scholars from Vikramshila University fled to Tibet, and they carried whatever manuscripts they could carry, the ones who survived, and then this was translated to Tibetan. So from Tibetan sources, you will find the accounts of the destruction of the universities in Bihar and Bengal, right?
Ma'am,
Uh,
when the invaders came to India, what were the centers that they encountered at the initial stage from where the scholars actually fled away? Matlab, what was the westernmost limit? Taxila University.
Takshashila was much earlier, before the Muslims. Takshashila was destroyed by the Hunas, the Huns.
Okay.
But these, since this Nalanda, Vikramshila, Odantapuri, Somapura, these were all destroyed by the Islamic invasions in the 11th, 12th centuries.
Okay.
Okay. And Vallabi in Gujarat, Vallabi was also destroyed by the Muslims. Ujjain, there was a Ujjain in Madhya Pradesh today. It was a very famous center of
But the
mathematics.
prime meridian from where the prime
Yes, prime
meridian.
meridian, because the most famous institute of astronomy and mathematics was located in Ujjain. So when Ujjain was destroyed and that Mahakaleshwar temple was destroyed, all those other the institutions were also destroyed, right? And these scholars, those who died, and those who survived, they would try to carry the murtis with them, and they would also try to carry the manuscripts with them and flee to wherever they went. And luckily, because we had the oral tradition, those who survived, even if their manuscripts were destroyed, they were able to remember something. They were able to remember a lot, and that's how today we still exist as Hindus, and we still have our shastras, right? Because of the formidable memories that they had. We have to acknowledge that. Uh, so it was a horrible genocide, and it was a destruction of knowledge. Both things were happening side by side. Uh, in fact, during the rule of Shah Jahan, when he came to know that they were repairing. See, Shah Jahan is shown as a very benign king, very secular. But if you see the records, you'll find that he is asking for all those temples in Varanasi to be destroyed, which are being rebuilt. The temples that had been destroyed earlier, when the Hindus tried to rebuild them, he gave the instructions that they need to be destroyed, the ones that are being rebuilt. So what is this? If you're destroying temples in the famous center of learning like Varanasi, surely you can't be a proponent of knowledge, right? So there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of whitewashing that has happened, and we need to be able to discuss this freely so that we know what knowledge has been lost and what needs to be brought back, right? So going on with my topic, uh, so this knowledge destruction took place all over India, and then so this is how the knowledge of science and mathematics uh, was forgotten in the land of its origin. So people in India forgot what has been written by Brahmagupta, Bhaskaracharya, because they were now fleeing. It was all a question of survival, how to live and how to also pay the taxes, because very crushing taxes were charged by the Muslim rulers, and to pay that was so there was no question of now thinking about knowledge and knowledge generation. It was all about how do we live, how do we pay the taxes that we have to pay and survive. So that's what the focus was. And that is why it is very tragic, when the European colonizers, when they write about India, how there is an absence of science education. Uh, you see, Europe has now built up on the knowledge that went from India, and they had built upon it and reached great heights. And they were producing scientific journals, they were doing research, whereas we Hindus had become second class citizens under the Muslim rule, and later under the colonizers, the European occupiers. So that is why when the British wrote about India, they said they have no idea about modern scientific discoveries, and we need to give them your modern scientific knowledge because they didn't know what had happened here. Of course, there are a number of British writers who have documented the loss of our knowledge, but overall, they didn't know that we the land of science has lost all its science and all its the theory to these invaders. So now I come to the next phase of knowledge destruction, which was during the period of European colonization. And that is also a separate chapter in my book with more details than the first book. So most of us look at the period of British colonization as one of looting of millions of trillions of dollars. So we know about the Kohinoor diamond that was stolen. We know about the draining of wealth from India, how our industries were destroyed. But we must also remember that it was this period of destruction of our indigenous knowledge. So a destruction of knowledge and pride in our civilization. That was the biggest damage that they inflicted on us. It was the beginning of a period when we became English literate, but our own mother tongue became a second language and third language. So, there was a lot of discussion that happened in the British Parliament about how our education system needs to be changed. So they realized that in order to govern us, unlike the other places that they governed, whether it was Africa and when, here in India, there was a body of literature. There was a system of imparting of education, of knowledge. So unless we destroy that, we cannot rule over them. So they had a lot of debates whether we need to be taught in English, whether we need to be taught in our mother tongues, which is the best way to brainwash the people so that they become submissive and they listen to what the British rulers are telling them to do, right? So it was a very well thought out policy, and even today we are discovering how clever the British were in terms of altering our education, right? So when the English Education Act of 1835 came after a lot of debate, 15 years of debate, they decided that we were going to be taught in English. So they were not going to take the trouble to translate our own shastras into our to into English and teach us. Rather, they would just teach whatever was available in Europe at that time. Science knowledge would be taught to us, and they would not teach us in our languages so that we would not read our own scriptures, our own shastras, right? Because they have actually talked about it that if they learn in Sanskrit, then they would always have huge respect for their own rishis, and they would not respect us as rulers. And same way, if they study in Arabic, then they will see us as outsiders. So they also did not want to promote Arabic. It was always English that they wanted to promote. So in my book, I have made use of the research done by Dharampalji. So I know very well, we are celebrating the centenary of Dharampalji this year, and on your platform, I've already spoken about how Dharampalji, we owe so much to him. How we came to know about from the British archives, thanks to him, we came to know that our Pathshala system still survived when the British came to rule over India. Though the higher education system was destroyed, the lower education, the Pathshala system was still intact, though it was in a decaying form. So the Dharampalji is the one who uncovered from the British archives that we had you see, the British, because before they introduced their education system, they did a survey of the whole of the country. They did a survey in Bengal, in Punjab, in southern India, to see what is the level of education and how can we alter it. So the survey results were all very well documented, which Dharampalji got access to when he was living in England. And so that's how we came to know that literacy was very high in the country even until the 1800s. So the British civil servants like Campbell, they have themselves praised our primary education, and they said that it was very unfortunate that the British were taxing the people so high that people can no longer donate to the pathshalas like before, because these pathshalas and these institutions were running on the donations given by the society, right? By the Vaishyas, by the Shudras, and that's how these schools were running. So Dharampalji's findings challenged the stereotypes about the Brahmanas and the Shudras. He noted that the surveys conducted by the British found that in a large number of schools, the Shudras were higher in number than the Brahmanas and the Vaishyas. And in Tamil-speaking areas, the Shudras ranged from 70% in Salem to and Tinnevelly to over 84% in South Arcot. This is mentioned in the surveys. Then in the Malayalam speaking areas like Malabar, the Brahmin students constituted only 20% of the classrooms, while the Shudras were 54% and the Muslims were 27%. So all these things came out from the survey. Only in the Telugu speaking areas, they found that Dvijas were more in number. Then some collectors the district collectors, as they were called, they spoke about the poor Brahmins who are teaching in the schools, even though their stomachs are empty, even though they are hungry, they're not getting salaries, they are still teaching in the schools. So this shows you the original culture of the Brahmanas, how it was their dharma to teach for the sake of teaching, not just because they are getting a salary, right? And so we can see from these surveys how the ancient education system was still struggling to survive and how it is now dying out slowly because of the policies imposed by the British. In fact, there is this famous quote of Gandhiji, M.K. Gandhi, who said that India was more literate 100 years before. He said this in 1931. So you can imagine. So he said the British had uprooted the beautiful tree of Indian education. So the question that will be asked is, what do we do now, right? So we know now that our knowledge we had huge amounts of knowledge. Then we know that it was destroyed. We were colonized. So what do we do now? How do we restore our civilizational pride? So that is something I've dealt with in the last chapter of my book. I've spoken about the path forward. So I am not saying that you need to completely bring back the Gurukula system, exactly as it was. That would not be practical because today we have a whole lot of different subjects. We cannot study exactly the same subjects and bring back exactly the same system. That won't be practical. But it would be a shame if we let go of these gems of knowledge that we created, if they are still relevant to us today. So we need to become grateful inheritors of our educational heritage. We must revive the culture of logical reasoning and debating, rational inquiry, which I think is still relevant today. Because today we can see that the level of logic and debating and language itself has degenerated. We can see that in media, we can see it in the public discourse. So why not we use our ancient shastras and our ancient system to revive that part of it? We must introduce courses on the great books of India, which are still inspirational. Books like Ramayana, Mahabharata, Yoga Vasishta, Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavad Purana, the principal Upanishads, the Nyaya Shastra, especially Jyotisha, the Gadita Jyotisha, selected Samskrita plays, various other. We need to do a survey of all the ancient works of wisdom that are still relevant today, and we need to find maybe condensed versions of them. We need to create condensed versions of them in different languages, which can be taught to all the students, because today students are coming out without any knowledge of what was said by Aryabhatta, what did he teach, what is written in our Nyaya Shastra, Natya Shastras. We don't know, and so we totally look towards the West, and whatever they are producing, we go gaga and we say wow. And it's very shameful when you go back and if you look at our own shastras and we find that the same thing has been said in a more elegant way and we have no knowledge of it. So that to reverse that, we need a course in our curriculum itself where all these shastras are introduced to the students, maybe in a simpler form. And then they're also encouraged to learn their mother tongues so that they can explore all these shastras in their own mother tongues, if not Sanskrit. There's a great advantage, I think, to learning Sanskrit. uh, it is very important. I mean, I would say that because I can see the changes in myself when I attempt to learn even a little bit of Sanskrit, just a little bit of Vyakaran. If I learn, already I find that I'm thinking logically. Even language becomes a science. So I think of language also in a very scientific way because I'm learning Sanskrit. So I think that Sanskrit has to be introduced. Maybe we can make it in the form of games. There are very innovative ways. In innovative ways, like Samskrita Bharati has found, songs. When we go to a Sanskrit camp organized by some Samskrita Bharati, the fun of learning Sanskrit comes out in just 2 or 3 days, and then people can go on for more serious learning of Sanskrit. Right? They can actually learn all the hard rules, the 4,000 rules made by Panini, and then understand Sanskrit more deeply. So I think all these things can be done because we need to do this to acquaint the students with the rich hues of our Indian civilization, make them feel proud, motivated. Then they themselves will study on their own because that's the way they studied in the past. Yuan Zhang has mentioned that it is very astonishing that nobody is forcing them to study. They themselves have the seeds of curiosity planted in them from childhood, and they're studying on their own. Swadhyaya, they're studying on their own. So we have to get those techniques by which the students are learning on their own. They want to know. They are so interested to know. It's not because they want to pass an examination. It's just because they want to know that there is the joy of learning has been revealed to them, right? That we need to do. And we need to stop looking at ourselves from the outsider's gaze. We need to get back our own Indic Trishtikon, the perspective, the worldview, because that is what made us the world's foremost thought leaders. Because our rishis, were having their own worldview and talking about how the universe, what they were observing. But today we have lost it. We don't know what is our own worldview. We look at everything as from the Western point of view, the way we have been taught, and so we have this sense of denigration, self-loathing, as we call it. We look down on ourselves. So that needs to be reversed, and we need to embark on our own journey of decolonization, and we need to become anchored in our civilization. So that is my message, and I hope you will all read and support my book.
Shikhaji has asked me a question in the chat box.
Mhm.
Don't you feel modern education is lacking this philosophical part of disciplines which modern education is giving in the form of degrees rather than value adding system?
Totally agree. That is exactly the case that I'm making. That today there is a very mindless way of a mindless education that is happening, where there are a certain number of courses that you need to get credits in, and then you just so there is no philosophical aspect, as the person has pointed out. Also, we don't have the history of that subject. I think it's very important that when we study a subject, we should start with the history of that subject. How was it understood before, and then how we progressed, and then we understand it in this way, and that itself will give you the philosophy, right? That's how we have this scientific way of looking at everything, because we go to the genesis of it. So I think in everything, yes, whether it is chemistry, whether it's biology, any subject, the philosophical aspect will come if you actually go with the Indic way of learning that subject. So I think there's a lot of research needed in pedagogy in how to teach all these subjects. I think the process has started with the new education policy, and I hope it gets refined over the years. So when you study gravity, for instance, or physics, for instance, then you have to go according to you will get a lot of ideas in Vaisheshika Shastra, how they viewed it, and be rooted in the civilization. So that's how when we do research, so we will not think of doing crazy things, crazy things which will that what you call that innovation that we are having today, right? Where you want to disrupt everything, disruptive innovation. It really makes me think, what are you trying to disrupt here? Are you trying to just uh, we have the kind of research where you're trying to put the genes of one organism into another organism, right? And so when if you're not anchored in our civilization, in philosophies, then we will not understand that certain research is actually going to be harmful to our civilization. So those are the things I think we need to be mindful of.
Yes, ma'am. And Shikhaji has also said that, ma'am, even so-called nomadic people have more vast knowledge and they are getting first-hand experience. But modern education is devoid of any first-hand experience. They are made to believe that what they are learning is right instead of looking for answers by their own.
Yes, I think there is all this happening. So, for example, there are a lot of frameworks that are introduced to the student, and they operate within that framework, like the conflict lenses. So then they look at everything in terms of conflict, right? So they don't look at in terms of dependence, mutual interdependence. So if they look at in terms of gender conflict, caste conflict, urban versus rural conflict. So everything is looked at in terms of conflict, which is a Western lenses. Whereas our lenses are different, where we look at everything in terms of cooperation, collaboration, right? Even in the midst of chaos, how there is cooperation happening. So we haven't developed those lenses. So we are being force fed to look at the world in terms of, that's why we have the Marxist lenses, where we are looking at haves and have nots, right? So we are looking at in terms of happiness. Those who are having more things, more possessions, they are more happy, versus those who, everybody is now trying to get more possessions, more wealth in order to be more happy. So these things are all coming from the West. We're not looking at it from our own lenses.
Ma'am, I have a question, ma'am. What was the difference between Buddhist and Hindu style of education in the Buddhist universities and in the Hindu universities?
Actually, there wasn't. I mean, if you look at Of course, the philosophies are different, the books are different and all that, but they were all studying side by side. So in Nalanda, it was not a Buddhist university, though Bauddha Dharma was being taught. They were being taught Nyaya Shastra, they were being taught the Vedas. So it was not like, so there is today is being made out as if Buddhism was a different religion, but it was all part of the same, the spectrum. So this was like so another guru has come called Buddha who is teaching within the same civilization. So it was all within the same, you could say the same religion, but different subset, different sects of the same religion. It's very shameful today that we are thinking of Buddhism as a whole different religion. You don't do that with Islam, right? We don't think of Shias as a totally different religion, Shia philosophy, or the Sunni is a totally different. We don't do that. They call it Islam. Whereas here we are in India, we under the colonial influence, we are calling it Sikhism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, but they are all actually the same. But there are different gurus, and yes, there are slightly different methodologies, but they are all the part of the same corpus.
Ma'am, in the universities, what sort of autonomy was provided to the teachers, like selecting students and designing the syllabus, taking examination? Like हम लोग तो आज मतलब हमें यूनिवर्सिटी सिलेक्ट करते हैं, हम लोग एग्जाम देते हैं, फिर हम लोग टीचर से मिलते हैं. मतलब उस समय क्या होता था एक्चुअली, टीचर्स क्या सिलेक्ट करते हैं, ऐसा कुछ?
I think, well, we can only go by conjecture, right? Because there is no book which is telling you exactly how much autonomy was given. And we have to make conjectures based on inscriptions, whatever is left with us, right? The fragments of manuscripts. But it does look like there was a lot of autonomy. So the teachers had the freedom to teach in the ways that they wanted, the gurus. And that's how the gurus who taught in a certain way would become very famous because of their way of teaching. And more people are going to that Gurukula. So there was that, but of course the subjects were all known. There were like 18 vidyas that are mentioned in Mahabharata, different disciplines, and there were the famous works written by the earlier scholars. Those were being used as a guide, so those were being taught, right? And so there were grammar. Like grammar was very well codified thanks to Panini. So grammar was being taught in a certain way, and then there are commentaries. So those commentaries are being taught. So that was the way. There was autonomy, but there was also control. And so there were, it's interesting that the students who are studying a certain commentary, right? They are all called as, they are named as that. They are students who are studying that. So that's the way they were referred to, right? And so in that sense, there was this, it was well institutionalized, that they proceeded step by step, that, they first have to study this and they have to move to the next level. That was all there. But it was not as as compartmentalized as today. So today we have very rigid barriers between the different subjects. It wasn't like that, and so there was the freedom, there was autonomy, there was freedom, and different institutions had their own culture. Okay, so for example, in Mithila, there is a story that they were not allowing the students to take anything outside the university. They could not copy anything and take it out of the university. Whatever they studied there, it had to remain there. It had to be in their mind, but they cannot carry away anything, copy any manuscript and take it with them. That was the rule of Mithila. Okay, and so that's one of the students. He was so angry that he's not allowed to copy anything, that he started his own institution. That is how Nadia, the Nadia University in Bengal came up, because one student did not like the way that it was being done in Mithila, and he started the Nadia University, which became so famous, it became a rival of Mithila University. So that's the thing. So different institutions were also creating their own rules.
Nadia means that Navadvip one.
Navadvip, yes. Yes.
Ma'am, was there any system that the traditional knowledge about the families and community culture and society were taught separately? Like,
no, so the Jati system was exactly that, right? Every Jati was actually preserving its culture, its traditions, its songs. They also had sometimes their own temples, and they were taking care of their temples. So that is the way everything was being taught there. So they would know the tradition, they would know the history, they would know the stories, and that is the way all these Jatis were actually preserving. They were keeping India very strong, right? So the knowledge was being preserved very strongly. Like if there is a sculptor, all the sculptor jatis, they were preserving the knowledge, that the fine techniques of sculpting. And so people who would learn from them would have to live with them, just like a Gurukula. That was the parallel system which existed. One was the Vedic Gurukula, right? But a parallel system was there for all these skills. So the students would stay with these shilpis, learn the shastras. They had their own shastras, and so they would learn and they would preserve that culture and they would lead that lifestyle.
Ma'am, I have a question. We know that our current suicidal rate in India is increasing. These are mainly because of failure in exams, parental expectations, overprotectiveness of parents, pressure of syllabus, unemployment. Ma'am, can this be checked through the traditional, through our ancient style of teaching? And can the curiosity among the in studies can be enhanced among students through our ancient?
Totally, totally. I think that's exactly what I'm talking about. That all this, when I look at the suicides, all the depression, that's why I'm talking about brahmacharya. That in that brahmacharya period, if you can modify it, we don't need exact the same kind of brahmacharya that was there in ancient times. But can we think of a modern version of brahmacharya where can we brainstorm, in which the students are all made to realize the bigger purpose of their life. It is not just about passing this examination. They have to now find what they are good at and try to excel in that. And they should never lose the faith. They should have a faith in a higher power that is taking care of them. And also the karma, right? So that perform good actions, be compassionate, be kind, be understanding, because all this is going into a karma bank, which will lead to good futures for you. So if all that understanding is there, then automatically there will be an acceptance of whatever is happening, and a thinking of like, I will do my best in whatever situation I'm in right now, and things will get better. You have that shining optimism which comes. And then examinations also will not be like, of course, I'm not saying in earlier times there were no examination. They were very strict examinations. Like, you could not get into Nalanda if you're not good enough. Only 20% of students were getting admission into Nalanda. And similarly, other uh, gurus also had their own standards. So it's not like anyone who wants to study in that Gurukula can come and study. If that student doesn't establish that he has the adhikara, he'll not be taken into that institute. So even in those days, there was failure, right? But the thing is that, of course, the pace of life was slower, and there were a variety of alternatives that the students could take up, which that also is the role of the government today, that to give all these options to the students, that everybody doesn't try to get into medical schools or get into engineering schools. Let all these skills be taught. Let there be a variety of options where the student can develop uh, his or her personality, right, by following that path. So I think one is, of course, the Atma Jnana that has to be introduced in all the courses, so that the students develop that character, that self-awareness, self-realization. And then at the government level, they have to make available all these courses. They have to make available more options, more career paths for the students, and also entrepreneurship. What about entrepreneurship? That is being totally killed by the education system. So if a student is not able to get into a course, is not able to study, maybe there is something the student can start on his own or her own, some business, and become successful in that, because that's how in the Western world we have Bill Gates, we have Steve Jobs. All these people were not did not become great because they passed some examination, right?
Yes,
They just
absolutely.
tapped into their own skill, their own sense of self worth, and they became great people. So I
Absolutely,
think
ma'am.
those are the things we need to look at. Yeah.
Ma'am, Shikha ma'am has also asked another question. Ma'am, do we also have different categories of universities for spiritual seekers and worldly people, or it was essential for both? Do we also
So there
have
were lots
different?
of categories. I mean, I myself am still discovering the categories, right? There was actually a kind of certification for spirituality. Like, there are all these gurus, there are the akhadas, all these, they will certify whether a person is has reached a certain spiritual level. So it was not a random thing. So there were categories. There were always, like even Ramakrishna, if you read the story of Ramakrishna, his fame became known, right, as a spiritual person. And then he found another guru who came and examined him to see whether he has that level of understanding, whether he's really spiritual. Yeah, his sadhana, is it good enough? And that's how then Ramakrishna was certified by another guru, right? So these things were there. So the certificates, certification, categorization, even at this in the spiritual knowledge. So yeah, it was there. So the details, if you want to know, we have to read, learn the languages, learn Sanskrit, and read our shastras in order to know all that. And of course, we have to meditate. We have to meditate. We have to think. We have to ponder a lot more.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this wonderful talk. I was just feeling like in today's world, everybody is going for this professional degrees and all. Somewhere or at the some time, we also feel like हमारा जो कुलीग है वो अगर ये सब्जेक्ट पढ़ रहा है या हमारा ये जो फ्रेंड है वो अगर मैथ्स लेके या साइंस लेके पढ़ रहा है तो क्योंकि वो मेरा बेस्ट फ्रेंड है तो हमको उसका साथ देना है ऐसा टाइप का. So, do we have this system in ancient time also, or there was a system to explore yourself? Keep what kind of interest you have. You have to realize that first. Then only you can go forward for higher education.
Of course, it was always there. I mean, you also could change your guru, right? Like you could also. So it was not just a guru who is testing the student and taking the student. The student also is looking at the guru and seeing whether the guru is the right fit, or whether the subject is the right fit. So yeah, I mean, humans are humans. I'm sure even in ancient times there would be friends who would together go and study the same subject, right? And then there would be the one student would realize that this is not for me. It's too high level for me. I'm not able to understand, and there'll be dropouts. And so I'm sure even in those times that would happen. I mean, the guru. It was also the guru's role to ask questions from the students. That oral, that examination that would take place, the entrance exam, was about the guru understanding whether the student is actually interested in this line of study, whether the student is designed for this line of study, and telling the student maybe you need to explore something else. So I'm sure it was very much there. At least this is what I can gather from what I have read.
Ma'am,
But
do you also feel that this is one reason we have lots of unemployment? Because somewhere we are going for this rat race. हमारा पड़ोसी इंजीनियरिंग कर रहा है तो हमको भी इंजीनियरिंग करना है वैसा कुछ. So that's why we are having much more unemployment and different kind of depression and anxiety within the student community. So do you feel we should bring this forward before choosing or selecting any subject? You have to understand कि ये subject मेरे लिए बना है या नहीं.
yeah, that's true. That's why internship is also important, right? You intern and you intern with a person who is working in that field, and then you see whether you would like to do this job later on in life, right? All internships should be there at a very early on when you're studying, so that you get to know. And even, I mean, in the high school days itself, all these things, the students have to be exposed to a variety of disciplines. And I think even in those days, it was happening, But yes, in fact, today there is more choice, because in those days, if you are born in a certain jati, you would most likely follow the family profession. So if you're born in a musician family, then most likely you're going to become a musician, because everybody is in musician. You'll be either making instruments, or they are, in playing instrument, or they are singing. So in fact, in those times, though there was choice, there was also a little bit more restriction, right? But today, this rat race which is there, it is a fault of the system. It is the fault of the government. It is also a fault of the parents and the students, right? Because no, but then there is a history to this, right? Why these professions have become so important? If you look at it, when India got its independence, they needed all these people. They needed a lot of engineers to build India's infrastructure, and that is the time when all this rat race had started for engineering, right? They needed engineers, they needed doctors. So it needs a very wise government to understand that now we have reached a certain level that we don't want everybody to be studying engineering. We want chartered accountants. We want all these people in finance. We want people in arts. We want people in literature. So that we have to ensure that there are opportunities in all these professions, and all of these are valued equally. So it is also about the mindset that has to be changed, and it has to work from the at the societal level and from the government level also, right? So I think this is this rat race. To reverse the rat race, there has to be that awakening, and the education policy. I think that's the reason why there was this call for a new education policy, which is now being implemented. And so the students are now being introduced to all these skills. The skill India, right, which has come about, is because they want to make the students aware of all these skills that are there, which can lead to your own setting up your own business. So everybody doesn't need to become an engineer or a doctor. And even within medicine itself, there are so many fields. You can be a physiotherapist, you can be a pathologist. There are so many allied professions also which one can get into. So the education system has to make the students aware of all these alternatives, and they have to learn, they have to intern, they have to work intern, I mean intern, uh, and see whether they like doing that, whether you like to be a pathologist, you like analyzing samples of blood and stool under the microscope and finding out what is the disease, whether that is an exciting profession for you. So they have to get an exposure into all this, and then start qualifying for that. So I think it's about how the education system needs to be changed to stop this rat race.